Yoga Teacher Hotline.
Hey, it's Emily. My question is, what do we say when people come to us looking for medical or health advice when we haven't been trained to give it?
I love this question so much because for some reason, as yoga teachers, it seems that we are put in these positions of somebody's therapist, somebody's doctor. People come to us thinking that we have medical advice, that we have emotional support and whatnot, and we're sort of this like go-to for people's mental and physical health. And we are, but we're not. So the first way to think about answering this question is, what is the yoga teacher's scope of practice? Like, what are we and what aren't we? What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? And this scope of practice question is really important, especially because in the yoga world, there's no regulation. So if you were a psychotherapist, if you were a physiotherapist, a medical professional, you're going to have a very clear scope of practice laid out. Once you're certified, once you're doing your job, that's a very clear information. But yoga teachers are a little bit more like the Wild West. We don't have a governing board. We don't have one single authority that's dictating what our scope of practice is. So now what that means is that we have to bring that on ourselves to be very clear on what is my role and what's not my role. And it's also a little bit tricky because many medical professionals and healthcare professionals will actually recommend their patients to go and do yoga. So the classic story, right, where you have somebody who comes to your class and says, well, I've got this knee, and so my doctor said to go do yoga. Or maybe somebody's therapist said, okay, I see that to help support your stress levels and your anxiety, go and do yoga. Beautiful intention by those professionals, right? Because theoretically, yoga can help our body. So no wonder a medical doctor might encourage somebody to do a yoga class. And of course, the mental health benefits of yoga are huge. So no wonder a therapist would recommend that. But as we know, not all yoga is created equal at all. So if that person with the knee issue that their doctor recommended them to goes to a hardcore vinyasa flow class, that may not be the yoga that is going to be the most supportive. So as yoga teachers, that scope of practice can get sort of muddied because people will be doing the practice for many different reasons. So let's go and think for a moment. What is not in our yoga teacher scope of practice? So first of all, yoga teachers are not medical doctors. We cannot give medical advice. We cannot give prescriptions. We cannot, anything medical related is out of our scope. Mental health related, same thing. We cannot prescribe certain things. We are not here as licensed therapists to give marriage advice, dating advice, life advice. But if you're teaching yoga, you know that people will probably have come to you looking for you as an authority and in that capacity. And we're human. We are human. It might feel really nice to have somebody stay after class and be like, this is going on with me, blah, 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 spilling all their emotional distress onto you, looking for some advice and support. And I also think the majority of yoga teachers are wonderful helpers, people who may be conditioned to be people pleasers. So some of these aspects come out, and so you're like, oh no, somebody is hurting in front of me, I want to help them. So that is a good, beautiful, beautiful impulse. But remember your scope of practice of what you're not. You are not that person's therapist. You are not that person's doctor. And yet you can still be a beautiful, compassionate human and know your boundaries, which we'll talk about in a moment of how to enact those boundaries. Okay, so you're not any of those things. So what can we do within our scope of practice? And there's more things I'm sure we can say. I'm just saying a short list here. But we, in majority of yoga classes here in North America, Europe, in the West, we're teaching yoga asana, we're teaching movement. So what we can do is offer different movement opportunities for people, different movement experiences. And within those movement experiences, we can bring in the yoga philosophy. We can bring in that mindfulness of what's going on in the mind, what's going on in the heart, who am I? We do that within the movements that we teach, right? You do a balancing pose and you also, yes, we're improving the physical proprioception while we're doing balance, but then we're also offering an opportunity for us to go, hey, are we overworking that balance? Am I getting too tight and controlled? Now let that go. So, right, this is how we meld the heart and the bones, how we meld those aspects of the yoga practice. We offer opportunities in our classes for people to see themselves both in their physical body, emotional body. And that's quite nebulous too. So I recognize saying that. That's still not concrete and clear. Because I think this is a beautiful practice for us as teachers to actually take the time to write down for ourselves what is within my scope of practice, because then your natural teaching boundaries are also going to be more clear. Because you are likely going to be, or have been again in these scenarios where somebody again stays after class, wants to pour their heart out at you, but you've got to go, you've got to pick up the kids or get the groceries or just leave. You're not getting paid for this anymore. So it's important to create a boundary, and that's what a scope of practice does, is create a clearer boundary for ourselves so that we can learn to say no, we can learn to say yes, and we can learn to actually then offer people options to go to somebody who is qualified to help them. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of scope of practice. Very loose. I know there's more things we could unpack. If you want to leave in the comments what you feel are a teacher's scope of practice, aren't a teacher's scope of practice, please put those into the comments and just start that discussion rolling. But now let's talk a little bit of how do we do this then? So when you inevitably have that person who's going to stay after class, how do you nicely or with care and compassion say no to them? Stop it ahead of time. So I'm going to say what I have experienced and feel. You're your own person. You're going to do it your way. And if you're new to this, if you've let people sort of stay and talk and you're like, yes, I'm here to help you, but that's okay. And so if it's new to you to actually say no, just know that's a practice for you. And that's a beautiful opportunity for your own yoga to show up. And you're learning how to actually have your boundaries, know what they are, how to say them and enact them, and be okay with somebody maybe not enjoying the boundary. Because that's the thing about boundaries. They can be confronting to the people who are maybe pushing them. Okay, so let's play with this here now. So let's use the example again. I'm going to use two examples. I'm going to use an example of what you can say to the person who's medical doctor, let's say. So on the physical side of things, what you can say to that person and what you can do and some options. And then on the mental health side of things, what you can do. So we're going to go mental health first. Again, let's say you've got that scenario, the person's wanting to talk and unload all their stuff onto you. And even if you want to hear it, again, you don't have the time, the capacity, and actually just straight up, it's not within your scope. You are not that person's therapist. So number one, you get to decide, do I have the capacity maybe just to listen? You know what? Sometimes people need to hear, be seen and heard. Can I give that person that space? Do I want to give that person that space? Should I give that person that space? This is for you to decide. This is going to be scenario and situation and person specific. Sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes you're like, oh, wow, I hear you. And so just know that if you decide, yes, I'm going to actually give that person that space and it feels okay and within your boundary, The scope of practice part is, I'm not going to give advice. Please. It's not, this is another thing that this is also a power dynamic, my friends. So this is where it's a tricky, nebulous thing. So that person has put you as the kind ear, as the yoga teacher. Oh, well, they teach yoga, they must be so calm. They must have everything figured out. So I'm going to spill what's going on in my life to them. So then just know that as teachers, there's always a power dynamic, and we need to be aware of that. And that's why having boundaries and that clarity, okay, can I just do I want to listen to this person or not? Okay, so again, so just know that. You decided to listen to them, but please, within that power dynamic, within your scope of practice, just acknowledge with kindness and care. We all just want to be seen and heard, and especially when we're struggling. So we may want to say something along the lines of, that's like mirroring back to them. I can imagine how hard that is for you right now. I hope that felt better for you to share that a little bit. I see the struggle and the pain that you're going on. Thank you for sharing with me. I have to go and lock up the studio right now, or I have to go. And in fact, you just don't even have to say excuses. Your no is enough, right? Boundaries. So thank you for sharing that with me. I'm grateful you felt that was safe for you to talk about whatever you want to say. I have to go. I hope to see you at the next class. And in the meantime, I hope that the class that we just had gave you a little bit more solace or grounding or whatnot, right? So you can be compassionate in your boundaries. So that was the option if you kind of listen to them. Now the option if you're like, no, I don't have the capacity, I don't want to listen to them, this is not my role, then what you say is something very similar, minus the listening part. Just be like, and maybe they've launched into it. And so you're like, hey, thank you. I see that something's going on right now for you. I can imagine how hard it is, what you're struggling with. It sounds like maybe you want to talk to somebody. I'm not able to be that person for you, but hey, I've actually got a really great therapist. Or, hey, do you have somebody, like before you jump in with a solution, you could say, hey, do you have somebody else that you could talk to, a friend or family member or a therapist? Because sometimes maybe that's it, because that's not my role and I can't do that. This isn't a script. You kind of say things along those lines. So do you see how we're framing it in the sense that you're acknowledging them, you're like, hey, I see you, but you're also kind of being comfortably clear and going, hey, this isn't my role. Here's some other help. Okay. So I hope that helps on the mental health and the person who's more needy and just really needs that extra stuff that is not in your role. Right? It's not in your pay grade and your scope of practice. Now let's quickly go over the physical answers here. So when you have somebody who's like, oh, I've got this and this injury, and my doctor told me to do yoga, and you know whatever is going on in their body is out of the scope of your capacity to teach, or out of the scope of your capacity of the class that you're teaching specifically. So let's say you are teaching an intense vinyasa class, and somebody comes in and they're like, I just had a hip replacement 3 weeks ago. They wouldn't be there, but let's just pretend, a number of weeks ago. And my doctor said I'm all clear to go do yoga. And that is not a hip replacement person or whatever injury person is not going to be good in this class. That's where you have to go. This is again tricky because maybe they're showing up at this class, right? They've just paid the money and this is the only class that they can go to. And hopefully you've had this conversation before the class starts. And you can say, well, okay, so in this scenario, if the class is above their pay grade, so above their injury ability, it doesn't match, then you can kindly say, hey, okay, welcome to the class. Just so you know, maybe it wasn't clearly communicated in the class description, but this is actually a little bit more of a vigorous class, and there's going to be movements in it that aren't going to be necessarily as safe and supported for your hip injury, knee injury, insert injury here. So I'm going to do my best that I can in the class to offer some options for you, but this is a fast-paced class. The word vinyasa means, like moving through things fast. You're explaining this to the person. So I will do my best, but I may not be able to get to you for every pose. So just know that, and then you give them an option, and then you go. So while this may not be the best class for you, you've signed up, I get it. Do what you can, take a break anytime. I don't care if you need to pause. I'm supportive and encouraging of that for you because I want to support you with the injury that you have and support the people in the class. Oh, lots of management there. And then you can recommend them, hey, there's this other class that I teach, or this other class at the studio or somebody else's teaches that will be more supportive for what is going on in your body, right? So then you can direct them to the more appropriate class. You're kindly educating. Sometimes people just don't realize. They just hear yoga and they go, oh, okay, this is great. Right? So you don't have to cater your whole class to that person necessarily, depending on you, because sometimes, and I'm sure we've all been in that class where the teacher has somebody like that in their class and the class wasn't matching up with what that person's ability was. And then that teacher is very kindly focusing everything on that teacher and on that student, and then it ends up sort of ruining the momentum or challenging the pacing of the class, and everybody else gets missed. This is very nuanced. This one's a tricky one. So it's not black and white, whatever is. But do your best to just know what that person's coming into, give the permission to take a variation, to do what feels right, to not push it. You dote on them as best you can. And it's just, that one's a slippery, tricky scenario, and it just inherently is. It won't be perfect, but just again, all of this is to remember, what is my scope of practice? You are allowed to refer out, and it's really helpful as yoga teachers to have a list of physiotherapists, of mental health practitioners, doctors, whatever it may be, other teachers who teach other things that you don't teach, and refer, share, send the people, find that match that works for them. You're allowed to say no. You're encouraged to say no with confidence and kindness. So practicing your boundaries, and say yes to what you know and what you feel comfortable with. This is a beautiful, beautiful exploration. Keep playing with it. And of course, if you have more questions that you'd like me to answer, leave them in the comments, but especially don't forget to leave the scope of practice comments. What did I miss? Add any of your 2 cents to it, and see you in our next call.